this in 1994. Father Ineza is one of the many priests who helped in the ministry to the Toronto's Catholic LGBTQIA+ community in their AIM, which is all-inclusive ministries liturgies. You see, academic interests are Christian Islamic relations, feminist theology in 1994. Decolonial
Father Ineza
studies
is one of the many priests who helped in the ministry to the Toronto's Catholic LGBTQIA+ community in their AIM,
heterologist
all-inclusive
Michelle
ministries
de
liturgies.
and
His
queer
academic
theology.
interests are Christian Islamic relations, feminist theology in 1994.
Decolonial
Father Ineza
studies
is one of the many priests who helped in the ministry to the Toronto's Catholic
heterologist
LGBTQIA+.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahiokai. Can everybody hear me well? Yes, so we have the order of presenters today. I will introduce the presenters today, and then I'll invite them to do their presentations. I will begin by giving the presentations, the titles of each one's presentation, and then I will introduce each person before they do their presentation. And after the presentations, we will have a Q&A period, which will last for 35 minutes. So I will try to stick to the time. So today's presenters are Dr. Ahiokai, Dr. Manyati Kumalo, and Mr. Kananira. Dr. Ahiokai will be the first, and we have 10 minutes. His presentation will be on memories, retrieval of pre-colonial scholarships. Values, African ethics, political and cultural retrieval. Dr. Ahiokai is an associate professor of systematic theology and an affiliate faculty of ethnic studies at the University of Portland, an elder of the Sankofa Institute for African American Pastoral Leadership at the Oblate School of Theology, an affiliate faculty for the graduate program at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana. He is the coordinator of the university's Theology Thursday lecture series. He is a recipient of the University of Portland Outstanding Scholar Award for 2021. He's a board member and a fellow at the Webster Institute, a board member at the Catholic Theological Society of America for 2023 to 2025. Dr. Ahiokai has worked extensively with communities at the margins in Nigeria and in the United States of America. He has held academic positions at Royal Marymount University, Valparaiso University, and St. Leo University. As a product of multiple contexts, he is intentional at creating spaces for multiple perspectives in his research and teaching. His research focuses on religion and identity, African approaches to ethics, African philosophies, cultures, and theologies, religion and violence, comparative theology, themes in systematic theology, and interfaith studies. Among his published works include a monography titled Fostering Interreligious Encounters in Pluralist Societies, Hospitality and Friendship. I remember using this book in one of my works. 2 edited volumes, one of which is Religion, Women of Color, and the Suffrage Movement, The Journey to Holistic Freedom, published at Lexington Books, and over 100 published papers. He has given over 100 scholarly papers, keynote address, and invited lecturers at prestigious institutions and learned societies nationally and internationally on several topics ranging from social imaginations, decolonial approaches to identity construction, sociological approaches to understanding interfaith encounters, and deconstruction of structures of marginalization, and many more. Dr. Ahiokai's works have been published by Routledge, Palgrave Macmillan, Pauline's Press in Africa, Oxford University Press, Cambridge Scholars Press, and several peer-reviewed national and international journals. One of his forthcoming books explores the colonial critique of Christology and visions of the human, Palgrave Macmillan Press. Another forthcoming work offers a decolonial critique of ecclesial imaginations in the continent of Africa, with a special focus on the Catholic Church in Nigeria. That is from Brewery Press. Dr. Ayokai will gladly tell you that at the heart of all that he does as a theologian is to create spaces for God's life to be experienced by all in our world. So, Dr. Ayokai, now the floor is yours to begin your presentation. Dr. Ayokai, you are on mute.
Thank you very much, Father Ineza. I have been tasked to explore the theme of retrieval of memories. And it's very, we may be wondering why memories, we need to explore memories in the discourses on queerness. I have argued in some of my works that the crisis in Africa today, it's not an accidental crisis. It's a crisis of forgetfulness. And it's intentional forgetfulness. And this is the byproduct of colonialism, because colonialism creates a fracture in memory. And once there's a fracture in the sense of self in a society, then the people begin to forget who they are. They become less rooted in their own concrete realities. And when you forget who you are, then you can be easily manipulated and given a different identity or reality. In the context of Africa, we see this very much at play, where when discourses on queerness come up, the quick leap that Africans usually say is that this is un-African, it is alien, it is foreign to our culture, it is not something that is part of us. And unfortunately, when you look at that discourse, that type of claim, the last 200 years, you can easily say, yes, that is true. Most of the memories we have in Africa today, collectively, are memories that were intentionally being shaped during the colonial era. But failure to dig deeper into pre-colonial Africa's heritage is one will not be able to retrieve notions of queerness. But does that mean then that how then do we really unpack these notions of queerness? I argue that we have to, first of all, create a munetic suspicion. Always suspect what memories we have in our heads, and even in our social imagination, collective religious imagination as well, and ask the question, what is not yet being addressed? What is missing? And how did we come to what we know today? And these questions are very important in the retrieval of memories. So when we do this, at least in my own work, I have come to realize that part of what we come to understand as Ubuntu and Palava in Africa today does not unpack fully what they really mean. But when we go deeper into pre-colonial African realities, we now begin to see that Ubuntu was a ritualization of queerness. And how is this possible? It is through the negotiation that plays out in Palava. And what is Palava? Yes, the British colonialists called Palava a derogatory speech, one where somebody was talking, people speak as though it didn't make any sense. But they forgot that it made all the sense on earth. And because Palava is the ritualization and instantiation and awareness of difference and holding in place these differences. It could be sexual differences, ideological differences, cultural differences, political differences, economic differences, linguistic differences that are held in place, but yet, even though they are held in place, they are held with a particular purpose, which is the instantiation and the ritualization, the affirmation of abundant life. So Palava, and it is only in the abundant life that Ubuntu emerges. Without Palava, there can be no Ubuntu, which means without difference, there can be no emergence of abundant life. Without queerness, which is a ritualization, which Palava brings about, abundant life is not possible. So then what then are the characteristics of abundant life in pre-colonial Africa? Ubuntu itself is an affirmation of queerness. because the abundant life that each person embodies becomes a life where every other person can find their own life being instantiated. So a straight African or heterosexual African who is flourishing within the context of Ubuntu, their flourishing must open up a pathway for the flourishing of a queer person as well in pre-colonial understandings. And why is this the case? We find this because the African cosmology itself is a cosmology of queerness. It is not, so everything about Africa is a movement of queerness. It creates harmony. Queerness now becomes an existential marker of harmony in the African psyche. And so when we talk about flourishing of the cosmos, the life, the one life that we all participate, which is cosmic life, it is a cosmic life that ritualizes and validates queerness. When we talk about political harmony in pre-colonial African context, that also is the notion of queerness. I take, for example, among the TVs, people of Midwest, Middle Belt Nigeria, is what they had the practice and ritualization of the woman's body, which is akambo. It's called akambo. There are two types of akambo, the cosmic akambo and the communal akambo. It is the tattooing of the woman's body. When a woman is giving birth, is married and starts giving birth to children, her body starts being tattooed. But this tattooing of the woman's body creates a transgendered identity. The woman now embodies the fullness of the expression of sexuality through this tattooing of her body. She is both male and female because she is now the ritualized symbol of harmony, cosmic harmony in the community. When she now goes post-menstrual period, she's now older, her entire body is tattooed. So she now becomes the incarnation of cosmic harmony in the community, in the tribe. Any violence done to her is violence done to the cosmos because it is a disbalance of the queerness, the ritualization of queerness that occurs in the psyche of the TV people. This understanding has been lost in the African consciousness because of what colonial heritage did to Africans. It is colonialism produced intentional forgetfulness, a psychosis of forgetfulness. And so I go back again to another notion of political power. And you find this in the Buganda, the ancient kingdom of Buganda in current day Uganda. When you read about what do they call him? Not Mutesa, it was forgotten his name, just escapes me mind now. The matters of Uganda. And then they said the king killed them. And then the missionaries, English missionaries, Mwanga II, thank you, Mwanga II. And the missionaries wanted to penalize, wanted to offer a narrative of what he did. And they said he was a homosexual, and then he wanted to sleep with the young boys, the pages, and the pages refused. And then he had to kill them, and they were martyrs. Lovely story. I've written about this. I was shocked when I was doing research on this. First of all, it wasn't only Catholics that were killed. The first martyrs who were killed were the Muslims. And then after that, the Anglicans were killed before the Catholics. And so it was an interfaith crisis. But was it just that the king was homosexual? No, it was a ritualized political harmony. The king, as a symbol of political power, the king has to embody the full breadth of sexuality. So the king has to have sex with boys. He has to have sex with men. He has to have sex with women as a way of ritualizing the political power. These sexual encounters created political harmony in the kingdom. Yes, Christianity came and Christianity frowned against that. No judgment being made here because Christianity has its own different value system and we have to honor those value systems. But it does not mean we have to distort the story of this pre-colonial reality. So I am trying to retrieve that story by telling this. So it wasn't that he was, in that context, they don't see it as him having sex with minors. It was part of the ritualization of political harmony, the cosmic harmony that has to occur within the kingdom. And then that also said, I've also noticed that in the Ogwashiuku, which is in Midwestern Nigeria, the king, there is in the political dynamics of the kingdom, a queer person has power within the kingdom. And I saw a clip a few years ago where the king was sitting in his throne, and then here came this queer person to the palace, and the king stood up and bowed to this queer person. So this queer person that came into the palace symbolizes the ritual, the embodiment of the political power that exists within that kingdom. These are things that are lost today in Africa. And then I want to also go to this notion of linguistic realities, because when Africans say there is no queerness in Africa, it is an importation from the West, which I disagree with. Among the Yoruba of Nigeria, West Africa, they have the word called adofuro. And adofuro literally means for same-sex persons, people who are homosexuals. And then among the Hausas, Fulanis in northern Nigeria, southern Chad, Niger, southern Niger as well, they have what they call Yan Daudu, which is an effeminate man. But they don't even use these words in derogatory terms. They use these words in a very positive manner to speak about queer realities in their communities. And then you also have the Bushman artwork, which a book that was written called Boy Wives and Female Husbands. It was a book examining homosexuality and feminism in Africa. We find this also in Africa. So if we dig deeper into African pre-colonial realities, we see that Africa is saturated with realities of queerness. And then I want to end with a quick story. When I was doing a research recently on trying to retrieve memories on queerness in Africa, I stumbled on archival materials that an English missionary who came to the Kingdom of Congo, Kongo, in the 1400s. And one of the things he was lamenting against was that there was a lot of homosexual realities, queer realities in sub-Saharan Africa. And he was calling that and saying that this is the land of Satan, that we have to cast them, exorcise all the demons that is possessing them, that is making them to be homosexuals, and that the missionaries need to be very careful so that they are not drawn into this monstrosity. Now, why do I bring this up? This was pre-colonial realities in Africa. This was even the trans-Saharan slavery in Africa. And then here's a missionary encountering this reality in the continent. And so what I am trying to say is that I am not moralizing anything. I'm only saying Africa had queerness, but Africa's queer realities was not about people who were deviant, but rather it was more about the flourishing of life and the ritualization of abundant life for all of Africa's children. And on that note, I will say it is important and it is right that Africa takes seriously the flourishing of their children, because queer Africans are also Africa's children and they have a right to live a dignified life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahiokai. We will hear more in the Q&A period. Now, the next presenter is Dr. Minenke Nomalungelo Manyati-Kumalo. I pride myself in being able to pronounce it correctly, at least at 70%. Dr. Minenke Nomalungelo Manyati-Kumalo is going to talk about the memories and the retrieval and reconstruction of Ubuntu ethics as queer affirming. Dr. Minenke is a South African biblical scholar whose work focuses on reading sacred texts with understandings of popular cultural productions of narrative. Her work makes use of ancestral, sociocultural, and academic practices towards constructing pedagogies for collective psychosocial resistance. Through her dissertation titled The Serpent's Syllabus, reading Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 to chapter 4, verse 2, towards a queer Africana gnosis, and other recent publications, Dr. Manyati Kumalo seeks interdisciplinary analysis of the relation between epistemological and material presentations of dark queerness, paying particular attention to how words, attitudes, and narrative eventuation within histories, historiographies, and futuristic imaginations often animate allocations of non-human life agency in ancient and contemporary social, historical, religious, and epistemological texts and contexts. Now, Dr. Manyati Kumalo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustav. And thank you, Dr. Ayokai, as well, because I think there are a lot of connections between your work on Palava and my work on Ubuntu. And I think the sort of question that you introduce for the retrieval is a part of where a lot of my work focuses. And that's the question of, how did we get to the point where we understand queerness to be un-African, right? That, like, you are, I think, exactly correct about the memories and the experiences of pre-colonial Africa that are full of what we would call now queerness, right? And a lot of this is linked to the cosmologies that will construct understandings of human nature, right? Our ontologies, right? And Palava and Ubuntu become these cosmological constructions of what we think of as human nature, what is proper for our human nature. And as you are noting, Dr. Ayokai, before colonialism, there was an understanding that queerness is not only consistent to human nature, but queerness becomes a force that makes human nature possible, right? And this is a part of where I begin to then reconstruct the memory of Ubuntu, much like you do, Dr. Ayokai, is that the understanding that difference becomes fundamental to the ways in which we keep human possibility available. Right? Is that, like, humanity becomes stagnant and limited and cannot continue to exist in human possibility if we cut off difference in the human experience, right? And so Ubuntu becomes, I think, an ethical expression of an understanding of human connection in community and the ways in which our differences not only constitute individual identities, but our differences also then contribute to the wider expansion of the very nature and in the same hope as you, Dr. Ayokai, the abundant life of humanity, right? And so the question of then how contemporary Africa starts to understand queerness as un-African becomes one that is really, really important to me. And as a biblical scholar, I think a part of what my work does is that it highlights the role that biblical interpretation has played in the internalization of colonial homophobia and transphobia and queerphobia across the board. And a part of that is because mythologies in general, if you look anywhere across the globe, mythologies become key strategies, key apparatuses, key tools in any cultural context for creating understandings of cosmology. Right? If you look at very many cultures across the globe, our cosmological and by extension, our ontological understandings of human nature in relation to the wider universe and the experience of existence is often held in these mythological stories that will generate what I call these Gnostic understandings of who we are, how we are, and what kinds of aspirations we hold for our humanity. And a part of the ways in which colonialism becomes very, very prolific in its imposition of its queerphobic ideologies is through biblical interpretation, right? And a part of what my scholarship wants to highlight is the kinds of dangers then that we encounter when we retrieve pre-colonial histories. Is that a part of what I always want to acknowledge when we are retrieving pre-colonial histories is that we are retrieving them a lot of the times in colonized or post-colonized context, depending on your understanding of what post-coloniality is. Right. And because of that, there is always a risk of internalizing some of the epistemological measures and understandings of legibility that have been imposed on African thinking because of colonialism. Is that a part of the reclamation project of African histories across the board, not just with queerness, was we were reclaiming and retrieving African histories in order to, on the one hand, fight back to the narrative that Africans are ahistorical, that we don't have histories, that we don't have understandings of our histories, and that we don't have historical records or any kind of historical knowledge of ourselves, but then also fight to reclaim agency that had been taken away by settler colonial impositions and transatlantic human trafficking in the movements of chattel enslavement. And so a lot of the work of reclaiming pre-colonial African histories is reclaiming African subjectivity. And what I name in my scholarship, in particular in sub-Saharan histories, is that when we've reclaimed things like Ubuntu, we have reclaimed it in a way that has internalized some of the functions of colonial negation. And I think one of the stark examples is I forget the author colleagues, if you can help me, Ubuntu in Crisis, right? The idea that as we've reclaimed a memory of Ubuntu and therefore a memory of the pre-colonial African subject, we've done it within institutions that force us in Western understanding. And thank you, Kevin Bulaga, Ubuntu in Crisis. And in doing so, we have created a human subject that will centralize the phallocentric masculine subject at the expense of often femme and woman identified African subjects. And then by extension, in my own arguments, is that the negation of the femme and the woman in the reclamation of Muntu identity also is deeply entangled with the negation of queerness as well. And a part of how this works is that what we see in traditions like the Jama movement in the 50s in Luba Katanga, and the Jama movement becomes a very, very a popular movement of indigenized Christianity in South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, that spreads from Luba Katanga in the Congo regions all the way down into Kenya and Southern Africa as well, where you're seeing indigenous communities reconstructing and retelling the Genesis story in particular in order to reclaim the African subject. And what happens in the retelling of the Genesis story is that there is an escalation of the rejection of the femme, and the escalation of the rejection of the femme is also deeply coded with queerness as well. And I sort of track how then post-colonial engagements with mythology and cosmology after the introduction of Christianity and biblical texts is really, really doing a reclamation project of the African subject that is doing violence to femme-identified and queer folks. And the violence is not just literary violence either. I think as a South African, some of the things that I note in particular is the practice that is known as corrective rape, that is directed towards same gender loving woman in particular, that is understanding that this is fundamentally un-African and must be corrected by the African male subject, because not only is it foreign to our experience because of the ways in which we've reclaimed African subjectivity as exclusively heterosexual and masculine, the queer femme then is understood as a direct threat to that heterosexual masculinity, a threat that either must be corrected or eliminated. And these things then manifest the sorts of violences that we see in corrective rape, the sorts of violences that we're seeing in Uganda in particular, where there is a sort of weaponized cosmology that understands that it is not only inappropriate to be queer in Africa, but also it is impossible and therefore ought to be eradicated, because when we reclaimed the memory of the African self, we did it in a way that erased then the agencies of queerness. And a lot of my work will then track how the strategies for negation are deeply colonial, right? Creating a moralized villain, right? In the same ways where missionary colonial folks would have understood Africans as savage and primitive and fundamentally dangerous and hypersexualized, those things then get transferred into onto the queer body as well. And in particular, the ways in which the African, as you were naming in part, Dr. Ayokai, becomes a symbol of darkness that is associated with not only Lucifer and the Satan, but then also in the biblical text, the serpent, right? In the reconstruction then of African identity, this darkness is transferred onto queerness, is that queerness becomes a penultimate symbol of this sort of dark savagery that is primitive. And what that is that it's a replication of colonial strategies for constructing subjective power that is then misplaced in the construction of African subjectivity in our post-colonial context. And so then my work proceeds to think about then what can we do to still maintain the necessity of reclaiming our histories, because I don't think at any point I'm trying to say that we ought not to reclaim post-colonial memories of pre-colonial, memories of ourselves. But rather than we need to have a very distinct understanding of the ways in which African experience does not sort of get trapped in a sort of static, a historical void because of colonialism, is that the African subject continues to live and experience itself within colonialism and then within post-colonialism, which means that our memory of the pre-colonial African selves must also then communicate with the histories that are in between the pre-colonial and the post-colonial. And some of that then becomes the necessity of undoing then the internalized colonialism. How do we remember Ubuntu in the ways that Dr. Ayokai is naming, right? Remembering those sorts of differences. And a part of what becomes really, really important for me is because of how prolific mythology can be for the construction of cosmologies and ontologies, is that my own work becomes one that is very interested in the sort of alternative knowledge or gnosis that we get from African mythologies, and the ways in which African mythologies across sub-Saharan Africa will demonstrate deep, deep queerness in the ways in which the cosmologies unfold in the mythological stories that we have. And a part of where my work and even the contribution that I have made to this group is I spend a lot of time with Southern African Zulu mythologies. In particular, of interest to me is uNomkhubulwane. And uNomkhubulwane is then a shapeshifter goddess that exists in a lot of Southern African Zulu cultures, who is often associated with the femme and will be also associated associated with female traditional healers, but also will be associated with lesbian and other queer femme-identified folks as this shapeshifter character who embodies the human capacity to be different, right? As a shapeshifter, she is understood in the mythological contexts to embody the very movements of Ubuntu, right? In order to be able to participate in Ubuntu, you must be able to some degree harness the power of difference, right? And harness the power of difference doesn't necessarily mean that you always become that difference, but it's the capacity to empathize with that difference. And a part of what Nomkhubulwane mythology's name is this sort of metonymic power in the trans body in particular that is able to empathize and embody difference in performative and material and epistemological and ontological ways that is understood and closely associated with the very power of Ubuntu itself, right? And Nomkhubulwane as a goddess is also not a small goddess, right? Is that Nomkhubulwane will be understood historically as the daughter of Umvelingangi or Unkulunkulu. And Unkulunkulu or Umvelingangi is then the name that gets associated with the colonial translations of God when Christianity in the Bible comes in, right? And as the daughter of then the high god, Mvelingangi literally means the first to appear. And as a daughter where it's not always clear in mythology whether she has a literal mother, so Mvelingangi in and of himself is implied with a lot of queerness as well. She becomes the very embodiment of the difference that makes humanity possible, right? Is that like she is the difference within her own pantheon that makes that sort of cosmic family possible. And as she relates to humanity, she will always empower the difference that makes different cosmic families of connection and abundant life possible as well. And I've just sort of spent time exploring how language within mythology as well, to sort of finally connect to what Dr. Akai was ending with in language, can also help this project, because focusing on our mythologies will force us to interact with not only our languages as they have been remembered in post-colonial contexts, but also the ways in which stories retain remnants of linguistic development throughout time. And one of the things that is always very, very fascinating and important for me is that a lot of Bantu languages, if not most Bantu languages, are gender neutral, right? Is that like we do not have gender distinctions. And I think this is something that I said in the previous webinar, is that throughout so many Bantu languages where Ubuntu is the primary cosmological understanding of the human nature, the naming of humanity is always one that names humanity, not the gendered performance. And we don't have names that distinguish the gendered performance, but rather names that distinguish the different social, psycho functions that a human can have in their embodiment of humanity. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minenke. We address more in the Q&A, and I'm going to now invite Mr. Adela Kananira to present. We talk about values and practices, sharing our stories as a praxis of Ubuntu towards a constructive critique of queerness. Mr. Adela Kananira is from Burundi and currently living in Italy. He is the founder and coordinator of Gay Christian Africa Initiative, a reality that aims to build a bridge between religion and sexual identity and gender expression. He is also a trustee member of One Body, One Faith charity organization that enables LGBTQ+ Christians and advocates for change within the church, ecumenically and intentionally in partnership with like-minded organizations. He's a member of the National Committee of Progetto Giovanni Christian, a national network of Italian young LGBTQ plus Christians. Mr. Canadira is a screenwriter and journalist with a noticeable interest and commitment in politics and leadership. He worked for over 5 years as a communication manager of T4NA project, an initiative that aims to empower African young people to face key challenges of their continent by promoting and developing a culture of unity suited to the African context through lived experiences, training, mentoring, and networking. Mr. Kananira is a member of the African Regional Coordination of Politics for Unity Movement, MPU, an international network of politicians, ordinary citizens, diplomats, and officials involved at various levels, administrators, academics, researchers, young people interested in political issues of different inspiration and parties who wish to respond on a personal and collective level to the great question that humanity faces today, recognizing in universal fraternity the content and the specific method of their political commitment. So now, Mr. Kananira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gustav. Thank you very much, Mine and Dr. Ai. Usually I call him Simon, so today I'm trying to pronounce his last name. Thank you very much, really. And after the passionate speech of Mine, I don't know where to start. Actually, now I was mesmerized with her presentation. Thank you very much. So I think they have Simon and Mine. They have take us through what we need to know about our historical context as African. We talked about the crisis of forgettingness, forgetting our own identity and reality. We talked about the role of reconstructing our identity, our reality, and reclaiming our own existence, and also reclaiming actually the sense of our communities, which is very important in this particular moment. And for me, in this context, I'm going to ask myself, what is our responsibility as today? Because knowing that there is much to do is one thing, but also recognizing our responsibility as person, as African, as queer people, and as allies, and as person is very important. So now for me, I'm going to propose one way, which is not the only way of reconstructing this reclaim of our identity. One of it is storytelling, because basically stories help us to actually influence emotions and motivate to take action. So in this case, as Africans, we are called, whatever we are, to be part of the journey of reconstructing. So how are we going to do it? Everyone has a gift. Everyone has talent, I would say. But how are we going to use it in order to coordinate everything and become useful for not only for the queer people, but also for the whole community in learning and educating ourselves and retrieving our memories? I was today. There's a group I am in, and it happens that one of the member, it is on WhatsApp, sent a video of a mother from Ivory Coast talking about her son who is trans. So the way she was explaining the relevance of being a parent, especially in a context where no one is understanding you, doesn't help also how to deal with your kid who is actually transitioning. And this captured my attention because usually we talk about queer people, we talk about their struggles, the violence against them, recognition, but we also sometimes forget what it implicates also for the parents who are witnessing their kids being called names, being denied humanity, being denied um, any sort of existence, and how it also threatened the sense of family. So just this was what this caught my attention today, and since I was going to talk about it, I was like, no, there's no way I can talk about storytelling and I don't much on this. So basically, there are ways we can be part of reconstructing, of actually retrieving our memories by being active, not being passive, by being on front line, by being protagonists of our own future, by living so that the world tomorrow for the humanity we're going to live is going to be a better place for our those who are the next generation, I'll say. So who is going to tell these stories? Why do we need to tell these stories? I think, first of all, I will start with, I think Gustav was actually there, part of the webinar we had with Nomia from Zimbabwe. She was talking about her son also, who is trans. And I remember in that moment, I've never heard a mother on this on the panel, and I've I was taken away by the level of understanding, the level of empathy, the level of also of facing the society, facing the neighbors, willing to stand up and be there, my son. No one is going to take away that from me. Neither the church that I belong to is not allowed to call my son a demon because they don't know them. You know, so it was mesmerizing because I've never had a mother facing that. We all fear that in some cases because of also the pressure of society. And another example I would give will be the example of mothers of Ugandan. They are lactating mothers. When they responded to the anti-gay bill, anti-LGBT actually law that was passed last year, they are these courageous mothers who wrote an open letter to the president. So this, I mean, I'll call it this bravery of our parents being part of our journey is the kind of story we need actually also to share for others to feel we are not alone. We need it's not about it's not a queer fight. It's actually a community fight. It's a community call of recognizing. We talked about Ubuntu. It's our community call to recognize the humanity of everyone, especially for those who are actually denied that humanity. And also another example I would say it is on Christmas. I don't know if you saw that. There is this video that's circulated on TikTok of queer people in Nigeria, and they were talking about their coming out, their relationship with their families, and how they responded to the coming out, and this is this for personally it was a positive way of being part of reconstructing our own history. Why? Because it's giving. I mean, it's giving back to the community, especially in places that you might be actually risking a little bit, because in Nigeria it is not that it's all green there, especially when you're a queer person. But are we going to remain passive just because of what is happening, what we are allowed to, or as African living also not only maybe in our countries or even abroad, what are our responsibilities of actually getting out, standing up, and sharing our stories? It is important to this because we live in a generation that has many opportunities, many ways actually to be able to communicate and be protagonists of the future we want, using the technology that are available. We can do it in a very safe place, coming from maybe in an anonymous way. There are possibilities of doing it, especially in places where you can risk. Or for those who have made or who are living in places that it's possible to do it, they can also share their stories, be brave enough to stand up. And this doesn't mean only queer people. It means everyone. It means every person. I remember, I'm not only talking about Gustavo today, but it seems that he's the only person that keeps coming in my mind. I remember when he talked about his contact with a queer person in South Africa during the last webinar, and how it changed his views on queer people. So storytelling does this effect. When you get in contact with a queer person, what they leave you with you, what they live with in you, the emotion they leave you with, what, why don't you put it also in to the light of others? It is not a fight that we need to carry alone in retrieving the queer identity, which I appreciate with this research group, because that's what we are doing. We are not only queer people. That's what we need, but that's also what we need in a way that we need also to involve not only as scholars and researchers, but also we need to develop a language that everyone can understand, that everyone can relate with. It doesn't mean to change a language, but the kind of language, whether English, whether French, whether Zulu, whether Kirundi, uh, any language, so that we are communicating to the people, communicating to my aunt, who will never understand Christmas when I tell about my queer life. We have to find that language, but it is not our own battle. We need to do it together with those allies that are willing also to join and not remain, to be in a very, to the best part of the story, as actually Nemeka said the other day, to understand where we stand and be part of this journey, so that tomorrow we will leave a history for a better place to be. Sorry, Gustav, back to you.
Thank you very much, Adela. Your words reminded me of Dr. Susan Wood, who was preaching on the Christmas, and she said something about the gospel according to John, talking about the light and darkness, and how, and she was linking that to the preferential option for the marginalized, and she said that it is the people in darkness that appreciate more the light. Those who are overwhelmed by light around them don't sometimes appreciate the meaning of light. And I'm not saying that there are some people in darkness. That is just to say that when people are so much entitled to humanity, Sometimes they do not even feel the sense of humanity, but when they go in areas where people are being put in darkness or forgotten, then they start to experience the need of the light. And themselves, those who are in the light, they find their humanity when they go to those who have been marginalized and whose humanity has been denied. So thank you very much. I would like to thank all the presenters. Now I'm going to shift to the Q&A part. There is the first question I was going to ask to the presenters has been addressed by Dr. Minenke Nomalungelo Manyati-Kumalo. But I will come back to that because it is central to the work of this research group. The name of the group itself, Nomukubuluwane, obviously she explained it in a very perfect way. And I think it is good to come back to this because it makes us internalize what it means to retrieve those ways of expressing African cultures, identities in our own words, because one of the things that they used to accuse those who talk about queer life in Africa is that they use the vocabulary that comes from foreign languages. So Dr. Minenke Nomalungelo Manyati-Kumalo has addressed this, but Dr. Simon Ahiokai also and Mr. Adela Kananira, would you mind coming back to this sense of finding words and what it means to have for this group, this name, Nomukubuluwane? Why this name? What are you trying to retrieve with this name? I would maybe to go back to Dr. Minenke Nomalungelo to in a few words to say something, and then Dr. Simon Ahiokai and Mr. Adela Kananira to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustav. Just briefly, I think for me, what was really interesting, and this is connecting to just what Adela is saying, is that like a part of what I'm hoping we can retrieve with the language of Nomukubuluwane is the power to determine ourselves in our differences, right? Why I was sort of just eager to be the first to respond to this question as well is that like I'm hoping to then poke Dr. Ahiokai a little bit to say more about like the tattoo cultures and the traditions and that sort of stuff, because I think a part of the ways in which the retrieval works is that we're not just retrieving ideas and stories, we're retrieving cultural practices that can shape spaces so that queerness is more comfortable, more safe, and more joyful in its entry of our communities. And you say that like I'm in the process of getting my tattoos, and there's like a sort of like there's a similar kind of narrative experience there where, I mean, you folks would have noticed like I changed my last name as well. It went from Dr. Kumalo to Dr. Manyati-Kumalo. I didn't get married, nothing changed, but what changed is my ancestral status, which means then I now claim my maternal and paternal ancestry, which is going to constitute a kind of non-binariness, but that is also fully embodied, right? Like it's the femme that fully embodies the masculine simultaneously. And a part of that is cultural spaces that include body modifications, right? Tattoos are a part of it, certainly, but I've got my stretched ears underneath the headphones, and there are different practices that are sort of also get sidelined by colonialism that are the ways in which we name and mark these shifts. And I sort of wanted to connect that, and I'm hoping as you answer the question, Simon, you can tell us more, or at least say more about the material practices as well.
Thank you very much for that. I want to first of all say, just to add to what you said, Dr. Mini, that it's retrieval is not, I agree with you that we have to, the cultural heritage, so that spaces of life can be created. But it's also a retrieval of healthy bodies, of healthy embodiments, which colonialism destroyed or attempted to destroy. Because colonialism produces an avalanche of violence, and it legitimizes violence as a mode of being in the world. And so when the parents that Mr. Kananira spoke about coming to the defense of their children, their queer children, it's because in pre-colonial Africa, all children were welcomed, except maybe in the places like in Nigeria, where they returned to sender twins and children that were more than one childbirth also. But that was not even considered murder. It was more of taken back to the deities, the gift that has been received, because one is a spirit from the world of these deities, and they don't know how to take care of that child. So when we talk about retrieval of memories, and I'm I want to stress importantly the retrieval of language, because yes, Martin Heidegger said language is the home of being, and I agree with him. Language produces us. We produce ourselves through language. And when we have lost the breadth, the tapestry of language in Africa, the post-colonial realities of Africa, when we have lost this deep heritage, I call it the rainbow tapestry of African linguistic heritage, we have lost that. Then we begin to produce, the language we speak produces unhealthy humanity. And then it also leads to the production of violence. Because the language, the colonialism creates a culture of forgetfulness, and that forgetfulness is intended to produce violence. When we forget that the sacredness of life is at the core of African religious and cultural thought, then violence becomes a mode of being, because we no longer know that our ancestral link prevents us from producing violence. So I think that this work we are doing, it's so important that we may not be able to speak each other's language, but we must have an existential openness to that rich heritage of the language, because it's a healthy humanity we are trying to resurrect again, if I permit me for using the Christian motif here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I will just follow Amine and I don't know if I am pronouncing well. Yes, I think it is very important. This group group research is very important, because I think I am hoping that we actually come to a sense that we can realize that there is not only one way of being queer, or the term of queerness, not only one way, so that we can not only refound ourselves, we can finally embrace ourselves or retrace our own identity and our own existence, but also can put it in communion with other communities, with other continents, of what we are, and make the queerness a very broad and enriched concept. And this, it will be I will call this, it will be our contribution to I mean, to our I would say it, to our Western world, because this work we were doing, it seems that we're doing for us, but actually we are also doing for the world, because it has been always oriented like it is only one way of living, being queer. There's only one way of living your queerness. No, there is not. So retrieving our identity, retrieving the sense of being queer in our own communities, in different communities, will also enrich this concept, and we can have something to contribute. And I think it will create a more healthier and a more, I would say, I think, pure and diverse way of being queerness, not idealized. How do you say idol? Idealized.
Idealized.
Yes, idealized. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Hopefully that's what we are going to reach, and hopefully that we are also going to put our effort, our knowledge, our talent, our passion into at least making one step, so that someone else will join and actually kick from there. Thank you.
And if I may briefly just add to that, because I think the connection between what Adelard and Simon are saying is an important one to highlight, is that we also seem to be naming that the reclamation of a queer African memory is also reclaiming and decolonizing care. Right. And even when we think about language, we can also think about body language, right? Especially when we think about like not having the idealized then body even, right? Is that like African language is one that is not limited to the script. I think of linguistic modes that we have in Southern Africa where it has been translated into scripts and letters, but we would have used symbols and beads. And there's something about embodying those histories and memories that also embodies different forms of care and different body languages that then further help us disrupt this sort of singular narrative of what is the appropriate and proper self, when the truth is that there is difference and deviance that is deeply sacred, and there are different modes of expressing those languages and those arts, and then in turn caring for them so that there is abundance.
Let me add to what you just said, to what my fellow panelists just said. We also, it needs to be said that I love what Mr. Kananira started, and which many also continued, that it's not just there's no one way of being queer. The Africa's rich heritage of queerness needs to be kept and reclaimed, because most of the reaction today we see in Africa is a reaction to same-sex activities, relationships. Oh, they're having, how can a man and a man be having sex? How can a woman and a woman be having sex? But we forget that in Africa, pre-colonial heritage, queerness had a fluidity. It was an abundant way of being. And I want to also link that to the Western hegemonic narrative of what it means to be human. It is a dualism. There is always this prototype, archetype humanity, and then anyone who does not meet that archetype is not human. There is no rainbow tapestry of humanity in the Western, what I call the Western mind. It produces an archetype. And so everyone has to be struggling and fighting to check themselves. If I may use an analogy, a plastic surgery, you have to do the proper Botox, get the proper surgeon to do your surgery so that you can be purely human to meet that archetype. That is a problem. That is un-African. Queerness creates a rainbow tapestry of being human in Africa. It goes back again to this palaver, the holding in place of these differences. So I think it is important we locate these discourses within that context, because if we do that, it might change Africa's current resistance to queerness in our societies. Because, as I will say later on, queerness is a theosis of rebellion. I will talk about that later on when we go to another question. But it's important that we hold this in place. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, everyone. Simon, Minete, and Adela. Of course, you have addressed some of the other questions I was going to ask. Of course, we'll come back to that. That is the languages we use in retrieving these, and also for whom these memories and values and practices are being retrieved. And we are going to come back to that because that is a very important question. Like to stress it again in more words, maybe. But for now, maybe as those following on YouTube may not know, we have started the Q&A period, and now we are taking questions. You can write down the question in the chat, in the comments side of the YouTube. But now would Jody ask her question because she raised her hand?
Thank you very much, Gustav. And I thank you so much to all three speakers. I've been thinking about, Simon, your discussion of palaver and difference, right? And that without difference, there can't be palaver. Without difference, there can't be Ubuntu. One of the Ubuntu phrases in Kirundi is umuntu nuwundi, a person is the other. So you can't be a person unless there are others, right, who are different from you. But what I'm wondering, and I very much accept the argument that you and Minnie both are making about the colonial fracture and shattering, really. But I'm also wondering, radical difference is threatening. And when you have any system that is based on difference, Ubuntu Palaver system, there is often a single thing that has to be rejected, right? In order to maintain some sense of the coherence of the system or keep the fears of radical difference in check. And at times when I've asked Burundians, what would be the unforgivable sin socially or morally in traditional Burundi, they've said incest. That even a clear victim of incest would have to be set apart from the community and the perpetrators really driven out entirely, no possibility of bringing them back again. And I'm wondering if queerness has somehow come.
Did we lose you?
I think we lost Jody.
Yeah. But I can take that question. I think, yeah.
I also have a response, but go ahead, Dr.
But Jody, finish your thoughts. We lost you.
I'm back now. So
okay, great.
About the question of radical difference, and does it in itself provoke a need to have some unacceptable otherness and is queerness coming out of the colonial legacy that you so well described, taking that place now, along, very much manipulated by narrowly political agendas in Africa. And I do also want to say, Adelar, your questions, what is our responsibility today? Knowing that there's much to do, but what are our roles, right? I have found with my students here in Burundi that if I can give them a clear role, whether they're playing a part in a play or they're taking a social or administrative role in the class, they are totally actualized. Because then they are fulfilling their role. They are doing their duty in society, and they're doing something that they've been asked to do, and there are expectations of them, and they're happy to respond. But that without a role, they seem almost paralyzed. And I feel this to some extent myself in how to take a role. You have talked about storytelling, but I understand you're also a filmmaker. I think a lot about theater too. And I know that very little literature by Africans is read on the African continent, is read by Africans. It's mostly read by people off the continent, either Afropolitans or non-Africans. But I do think there is heroic work being done by African writers as well. And I'd love to hear you, Adelar, speak as a filmmaker as well. So that's the end of my questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Miklashki.
Jody.
Let me, first of all, we are not saying that, let me use the example you gave of incest. What does incest do? It deprives the victim of flourishing, of experiencing abundant life, their own subjectivity, their own agency, their own ability to consent in a relationship or not consent. So there is violence that occurs there. So that is not palaver. Remember I said at the beginning that palaver itself, at the core of palaver, there is a bond, a covenantal bond of unity that holds every difference together, in the sense that my difference, my agency, and my authority must be such that it does not limit your own ability, your own authority to emanate and also come to maturity. So, which incest does not do. Incest literally means the perpetrator literally is gratifying himself or herself and being violent towards the other without the other's consent. And so there is no abundant life, ritualization of abundant life there. In fact, there's the diminishing of life. But what we are talking about in the queer realities of Africa is that abundant life, a queer person, in their affirmation of their own reality, it does not mean that they should go and be having sexual encounters with minors, because there is no agency, there's no proper authority being affirmed there. So I don't think that, and I think that I would say that we have to be careful how we bring these two types of examples together, because that is how we perpetuate violence towards queer people, and then without our knowing. But the queerness does not mean incest in any shape, manner, or form. But I also want to add, and I know that's not what you are saying, so I affirm that. But I also want to add quickly to what you said when you talked about your students and giving them a role, maybe because of my own critical approach of a critical consciousness pedagogy, that even in the giving of the roles to the students, this is something we need to reclaim back in Africa through the palaver discourse, is that in the giving of role to each person, we also give them the space for creativity to emanate, to be ritualized, as it were. So giving, and that is where our culture is not static. So we need to push our cultural boundaries through reading the signs of the times and ask ourselves, what is queerness telling us today? And that's where I want to say quickly, before I give the floor, that queerness is a rebellion, can be reclaimed as rebellion towards freedom in deconstructing colonial vestiges that play out in Africa today. So in queerness, when I look at queerness, in queerness, I am able to reclaim a healthy religiosity in Africa. In queerness, I'm able to reclaim healthy images, icons of the divine in Africa. In queerness, I'm able to reclaim healthy embodiments in Africa that are rebellious towards the empire reification of one anemic image of the human in Africa. So queerness can become a theosis itself, an embodiment of the sacramentality of the Trinity, of God as Trinity, because God as Trinity is itself queerness. Where there is difference, queerness has been instantiated. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayokai. You've said so much of what I also want to say, so thank you for that. And I think a part of what I want to emphasize also in addition to you is that I think Western discourse around queerness also has like a really weird sort of obsession with sex acts. Right, the sort of reduction of queerness and queer being to what people do with their bodies, right, or like during sex and sexual encounter. And I think a part of what you're naming is that queerness is much more expansive than just sex acts, right? Because sex acts in and of themselves do not determine a sexuality. And I think a part of the point that I'm trying to make there is that as we reclaim and reconstruct this idea of queerness in relation to African histories, we're also reclaiming different modes of being, right? Different modes of living and existing as human on Earth. And this is why there is this very much rebellious sort of embodiment there, is that like the rebellion also is what catalyzes, ushers, and allows us to hold the difference of queerness up against the status quo that has been imposed by settler colonialism sort of globally. And I think that's a very important thing to highlight. And I think this is going to then connect to a question that came from the YouTube that is asking, how then do we disseminate these critical decolonial understandings in order to benefit Africa? And I think this is the thing that I want to sort of adjust in what you're saying, Dr. Ayokai, with a reminder of Mr. Kananira's sort of ethical direction, is that like not only is this like a theosis, right? This is a theoethical construction that is understanding and wanting to intentionally and materially build community that affirms queerness, right? And so I think to answer Jody's question and the question from the YouTube, a lot of the ways in which we can sort of mitigate some of the violence, I think some of it is that like queerness is not some sort of magical answer to all human conflict, is that like we will still need constant ethical negotiation. I think a part of the value of queerness in that ethical negotiation is that queerness is a reminder that we do not have to have the same ethical answers for everybody always in all things, and over determine and moralize things without a contextual understanding of what actually and materially contributes to life and joy. Right? And so queerness is not an eradication of ethics either. I think it's a radical transformation of our ethical directions, where we move from being determined by systemic modes of colonialism to being determined by then the freedom and power to negotiate ourselves in community and care. Right? I think that's all I want to say, actually.
Yes, I think Jody also wanted to know what Mr. Kananira would say in terms of art. I think as you say, you are a journalist. Yeah, so she wanted you to also respond to the question.
Thank you very much, Gustav. I will just be brief since we don't have much time. Thank you, Jody, for your questions. I think, as I said, our responsibility is only as queer people and as ally, as every person. Like, we need to actually put our creation, our passion in the light, in order to uplift the understanding of queerness. Everyone can do it in its own way. I can do it maybe by my screenplay, maybe that. But how many people in Africa who are going to be able to see my play, my movie? I don't know. Maybe someone will come up with another creation or symbol or something which is going to be more visible than my movie, or some publish a book that will be maybe more read than my movie plus the other creation. So I think we need to take this responsibility at a personal level of understanding that our contribution matters, however small or big it can appear, to make sure that our contribution is put at the service of understanding, of helping our communities grow in understanding on this matter of queerness, and also be fearlessly proud of this creation, because it might maybe not be appreciated as much today, but we are actually putting seeds of something greater, or we are leaving something for the next generation, as I said, to actually step in and actually move from there. At least we are making premises. So yes, it can be a book, it can be a movie, it can be a song. We have many artists. It can be a dance, it can be a theater, it can be anything. But as long as we are proud of doing it, and we are also courageous enough to risk for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I really want to affirm that, and I think this is a part of what I was getting at when I was asking more about like the tattoos and that sort of stuff. Is that like there's something about, right, that we don't have to limit ourselves to these spaces that we've been told create epistemologies, ethics, and ways of understanding. Is that like we have, and this has always been true of very many African cultures, is that we have different cultural resources available for us for producing these kinds of conversations and doing this kind of work. And I think a part of what we're naming is becoming more intentional about that. Is that like, how do we do more to create cultural spaces in our everyday lives that embody these kinds of thinking that we have in our research and in our literature and that sort of stuff. And I think this is very important, and this is just a pet peeve of mine with decolonial theory in general, is that like we cannot keep our theories as theory alone, right? Is that like they have to interact with real contemporary experience and what is historically present, and then allowing space to continue the negotiations that make our lives possible in a joyful kind of manner. But if I may be so bold as well, I'm just going to ask Kevin, if you're comfortable with sharing your response as well to Jodi's question on the matter of absolute difference, because I think that is going to sort of better capture some of the things that I was trying to say, because a part of what I hear you say in that a response that is in our comments here is sort of naming that queerness is not an ontological destination in and of itself, right? Is that like queerness is not some sort of determination that we are putting in place of cisgender heteropatriarchy, right? Right. To Simon's point is that queerness becomes a language and a framework in and of itself that is also questionable, right? We already have our own questions of the language of queerness, right? But it is a current epistemological mode that we have available to us to capture some of these differences without necessarily becoming absolute difference. And Kevin, if you are comfortable just saying more about your comment on that, I would be very grateful.
Yeah, of course. So the importance of the question, as I hear it, I mean these conceptions, Ubuntu or Palaver or other similar conceptions, they serve a function within a community. These are conceptions that are put in place by different communities for the sake of different purposes, but one of which has to be the establishment of the community as a community. So there's always an aim for the unification or for sameness, even within the practice of something like Palaver or Ubuntu, which is supposed to be open-ended. There's a sense in which there's always a limit out of which that conception cannot work because it's being imagined within the community space. And so in light of Jodi's really important point, I think if we are going to start questioning or widening the space of applicability of these concepts, then we need to also question the ways in which the communities' imaginations of what these conceptions are have been already set within a limited bounds. And so the way in, for example, when Jodi mentions incest as a thing that, for example, in Burundi people look at and say, well, this is the absolutely unforgivable, the absolutely unwelcome behavior. the establishment of this absolute difference also is functioning to establish what is accepted, to establish what the community is, what the Burundian community is, the Burundian Ubuntu or the Burundian Muntu actually is, which does not include the, for example, incest. And so when queerness then is being used to occupy that space, the space that was usually reserved for incest, then if we are going to really open up these conceptions of Ubuntu or palaver, then there's a lot of work that needs to be done to question the limits already imagined at the heart of the conception of Ubuntu or palaver. I don't know if that helps, but that's my take on this.
Let me respond a little bit, nuance that further to what Kevin just said. Queerness, it's not queerness taking the place of incest, because incest itself is already an attack on the life of the community, as you rightly said. It's outside of the boundaries of healthy community. But the question is, the problem is that we have unhealthy communities today in Africa because our communities no longer embody queerness. Queerness was how the community was healthy. So the communities are unhealthy today because we removed queerness. And I think we need to bring back what was removed. That's why we're talking about the retrieval. And so I think queerness does not in any shape, manner, or form try to replace incest, because incest is already, it's non-communal. It destroys the community. It is like a cancer to the community. But queerness is not that. But another point I want to bring up, which I think Adelard was addressing earlier on, was that where do we go with this? This is where the next generation, because colonialism creates a calcification of community because it already produces one type of humanity that it is outside of historical reality. It's ahistorical. You are this human and you are supposed to be this human 100 years ago, 100 years tomorrow, you don't change. So there is no changing, responding to the signs of the times, a continuum, and that is unhealthy. So where we go with this is that we already see, like what Mr. Kananira is doing is Gay Christian Africa and his own work, his agency he does with young people in the continent. The young people are already pushing the boundaries of our cultures, and they are trying to say that the cultures are stale and we need a continuum. That's like a fresh air. Well, let me use Pope John the 23rd's language, aggiornamento. We need to open the windows so that fresh air can come into Africa, and then our communities again can be healthy. And even, as Minnie also said, even our imagination of queerness pre-colonial times needs to also catch up to the signs of the times of today. So how can queerness, a continuum of understanding of queerness, play itself out? The young people are already doing that for us. The people who are obstructing that are our politicians, our church leaders, and even our educators, people who are afraid or who have embodied a classification of orthodoxy, but they forget that orthodoxy is also a fluidity, responding, and I'm talking as a Christian theologian, responding pneumatologically to the spirit, because the spirit is the one that brings fresh air to the room. So I just wanted to touch on these nuances. Thank you.
And thank you both for that. I want to just connect back to what Kevin was saying about absolute difference, and then just speak to some of the ways that my own scholarship responds to this problem that is being named. And I think there is a distinct need to sort of address that there is a possibility of the construction of this absolute difference. And I think a part of what I'm just trying to say is that, like, this absolute difference has already been constructed in the histories of our use of Ubuntu Ubuntu and Palava. And I think that is what these comments are getting at. And I think my own response to that is I want to name it as very specific to then the Nguni Bantu linguistic traditions, where in the indigenous cultures that I grew up with, Ubuntu as a concept is actually a part of an even bigger concept called Uluntu. So Umuntu as a concept is connected to Isintu. So Umuntu is the person, Isintu is the culture, Ubuntu is humanity, and then Uluntu is human possibility as a whole. And a part of the way the system works is that it becomes a negotiation between Umuntu, Isintu, Ubuntu, and Uluntu in these circular motions and movements between those different psychosocial locations. And this is a concept that I name then as infinite finitude, where some of the ways in which we address some of the ethical concerns that are coming with absolute difference is leaning into the idea of human possibility as Uluntu that informs humanity and its experience in Ubuntu, and start to say that we draw from human imaginations of what is possible for the human. And those imaginations are copular imaginations. They don't ever name an essentialized presence in human experience, because that is a part of how the human imagination works, is that we are able to imagine and conjure things that do not have an essential or material presence in our lived experience. At the same time, we also have the capacity, a limited capacity, to make those sorts of ideas possible in our worlds. And this is I actually construct this as a move against Neoplatonism, is to say we don't have to understand that dualism as a light and dark dualism that embodies corruption, because that is filled with deeply anti-Black language that also gets weaponized against queer people, so that we can understand that dualism as the relationship between infinite imagination and limited being. Right? And a part of what we're trying to name ethically in Ubuntu and Palava, as it's clearly affirmed, is that we can reclaim these ethical negotiations of humanity within our limitation, because we have the capacity to access the imagination of human possibility, right? But that means that then this is no longer a strict ontological determinations where we can make absolute differences a rule or a maxim of our ethics, but rather this becomes then a pragmatism that allows us to constantly stay in ethical conversations about who we are, and what sort of things we need, desire, and can create in order to make life abundant across all the differences that do exist, and what kind of ethical concerns we have there. So interesting discussion.
We are drawing to the end of the webinar. And maybe one thing that I would like us to address when we are closing, when we are making our closing remarks, is the way that was in one of the questions that were asked. How do we disseminate the research done on the retrieval of memories and values and practices of queerness in Africa? I'm saying this because I saw how we are quick to respond to some good work done for many years of research. The Pope himself, I mean, I'm using now the Catholic Church, but of course other institutions also do the same. People are going, choosing like researchers, putting together some work for many years and writing a document, and then you get a response in one day from those who would call themselves the voice of African people in a church, or sometimes politicians who may not have spent as much time researching these. So this also comes into that question: how do we disseminate these research? I mean, of course, Adela has addressed one of the ways of doing that, storytelling, but I mean, how does this kind of work become a way of a practice among the people beyond small circles of scholars where they would need to go deeper, and how do they have access to that? But at the same time, I think Simon was probably going to give an answer to what was addressed in the previous question. And then we invite everybody as we are concluding to you to give their closing remarks, in their own words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Gustav. Let me say this, that absolute difference is a myth that's not real. And I want to talk as a theologian, and that to explain that. If there is absolute difference, there can be no encounter. The Father, this Trinity, the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit. They are different. But in that difference lies the openness to relationality. So there is difference does not equate to absolute difference. They are completely different realities. Difference is a possibility for encounter, and also the affirmation of subjectivity. Hence, we talk about the Father, we talk about personas, the three persons. Persons embodies difference, but also embodies possibility of openness to relationality. Hence, we say that in God lies in Jesus Christ lies two natures, divine and human nature. But in their nature lies their commonalities. In their personhood lies their difference. And that is why they can enter into relationships. But absolute difference denies the possibility of the common ground. Then there can be no encounter. Then we cannot even talk of humanity. We cannot even talk of community. So absolute difference needs to be thrown out of the window. It's a lie. It does not make any sense. And so I think that's the ethical thing we need to unpack on that. So I'm glad that Minnie brought that out to the forefront so that could be addressed. Now, you asked how we can do this. I want to go back to what Adelard said earlier on. Sometimes some of these things are problems. We fight against what we have not encountered. If you have not encountered a same-sex person, a queer person, and then you have this mythology, oh, they are promiscuous or whatever, or you watch TV, the West, gay pride, you see people dancing and all that stuff, you don't know what that means. You have some form of aversion to what you don't know. But when you encounter a neighbor, your child comes to you and you have a relationship with your child and they say, Dad, Mom, I am queer. Do you reject yourself because your child is an extension of yourself? If you reject your child, you reject yourself. And if you encounter, and I remember Father Gustav said this about the first webinar we had about his classmate, and then who opened up and came out to him. It changes everything in your imagination. Your epistemic world is shattered. It forces a new question for you. I have known this person before. I have loved this person. I can take a bullet for this person. And this person has trusted me enough and opened themselves up to me. What do I do with this? That is what we need to do today in Africa. We need this research we are doing. It's not just a work of the head. It's the work of all the senses. We need to see queer people. We need to hear queer people. We need to smell queer people. We need to touch queer people. And then when we see them, the fullness of their embodiment, it forces a new question into our heads. And that the question will be, is this person is human in the fullness of humanity as I have come to know them before they told me this? What do I now do with this information? Do I deny their humanity? The answer is no. That becomes inauthenticity. And so when we do this, Africa has a lot of queer people. Nigeria is the highest consumer of gay pornography in the world. Straight people are not the ones watching gay pornography in Nigeria. So if Nigeria, the highest, more than the United States, they are watching gay pornography, that tells you there are so many closeted queer people there who are living in the closet, and that's not healthy. So, but when we start seeing them, hearing them, and using our senses to encounter them, then they will come out and their fullness of humanity will flourish and also make Africa flourish. Just for information, where people are very gifted. We need that gift to the growth and the flourishing of our continent. So let's humanize these conversations. Let's encounter, but it must be an encounter in the praxis of epoche, suspension of judgment, because the other that I'm encountering is an embodiment of mystery. And what do you do when you encounter mystery? You revere mystery. So let's revere each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think Minette wanted to say something.
Yeah, and I think this might then be functionally my closing comments as well. Is that I think also just as a person who thinks theoethically, we also need to be careful about the kinds of ethical fabrications we make as we analyze and interact with ethical theories. Is that and this is why I also want to hold a kind of pragmatism, is that like when we come up with like these ethical scenarios, these ethical possibilities in relation to queer experience, we're making discursive associations that can be used as we are naming in the comments, and then certainly Dr. Ayakai has named emphatically, that can be used to sort of do violence to queer people. And a lot of that, I think, is because the kind of problem solving that we're trying to do with our queer thinking is being taken and is being put in association with conversations that don't always reflect the interests of queer people themselves, right? Is that like when I think of my queerness, I don't necessarily think of some of the ethical problems that are attached to it. I think about, again, to Simon's point, the people that I love, the people that are in my life, the kind of communities that I have, the kinds of care and support that I can experience, and also the kinds of care and support that I cannot experience because of my queerness. And I think a part of what we need to do is sort of undo the understanding that our theories need to be perfect before we can act on a good that we can already recognize, right? And I think this is a part of what I've been failing to name throughout, that I'm having some brief clarity on, is that like Palava, Ubuntu, queerness, all these concepts are going to inevitably be limited, right? And I think what we need to do is disabuse ourselves of the kind of fear and abjection that we have to the unknown, right? Is that like to open ourselves to those unknown spaces in negotiation as a way of saying that like, I do not know all the good that is possible, and I do not know all the justice that is necessary, and I do not know all the things that need to be done. But there is this goodness, there is these recognitions that I do know, and I can work on those theories and ideas and finesse the limitations while also actively making that goodness possible. And I think this is really, really important, because as a queer person who's also a queer intellectual, often I experience a divide in my real life experience as a queer person, and then my participation in meaning making as a queer person. Is that a lot of folks who are very interested in the ideas of queerness academically or intellectually put a lot of labor to the ideas and very little labor to how they relate to me on an everyday, to how we talk to one another, how we respect our bodies and our presences. And I think some of that like comes from the obsessions that we have with perfecting critical theory. I think a part of what we should be more interested in, and I think this is the conversation that we've been trying to have in particular with Adelaide and Simon Ayakai and myself, is how do we then create these pragmatic connections between the ideas that we can come up of ourselves in our queerness and the queerness that is allowed to become a reality in our experience, right? And I think then we use things like Ubuntu and Palava as tools to negotiate, because again, it's the ethical narratives that help us make these things possible. But at the end of the day, I think the goal is so tremendously simple that sometimes it's tragic how complex of theories we have to come up with, because at the end of the day, as a queer person, I'm just saying I just want to live and live well. And I shouldn't have to perfect high theory to convince anybody that I ought to be alive and be joyful. And there's a kind of mourning then I want to name in the labor of our brilliance. Is that like, I think this panel has been brilliant. We have wonderful, grand ideas that we will continue to sort of finesse and play out. And there's a kind of just intellectually a philosophical, like outstanding effort that we're doing here that ought not to be necessary to begin with. And that's the kind of melancholy that I think hopefully there'll be room to talk about later. But just I think I want to end with a reminder that we are real and we are present now, and that there is a joy that is possible before our ideas are perfected, and we need not wait for our perfect ideas, perfect theories, perfect theologies to act on the goodness that is possible in the immediate, right? Is that like the future and the present and the past are connected, and we can act like it while also continuing to like develop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minenke Namalungelo Manyat Kumar. I always find it nice to pronounce the whole name.
I appreciate you very much for that. Thank you.
So Adela, would you mind also maybe giving us your closing remarks before I will give back the floor to Dr. Ayokai to close our webinar?
Thank you very much, Gustav. I will just try to be brief. First thing I wanted to say is like we need as this sort of group to there is an urgency need of actually paying much attention on what we call how can I say I can put it in this way, African concepts, right? To be a little to pay enough attention of also the diversity of and the specificity of every either country or community. So I think as this group, we really need to also focus also on that and so that we don't leave anyone behind, and we actually try to move together and in a delicate and understanding way of every community. Because here we are talking about African queerness, but maybe if we heard someone from the north of Africa, it will have enriched this conversation in a very different way. So that was my point. And the second point was like, we need to be the bridge. There is an urgency also to be the bridge. In which way? Bridge in a way that we need to have among us people who are passionate enough, I would call, people who are brave enough, and people who are willing actually to be conducting a very fruitful dialogue with the church, dialogue with political institutions. Not that if all of us can do that, but if we have people who are this passionate enough and they have this charisma of actually moving the dialogue not only in this space, but being sure that also we are constructing fruitful and forward dialogues in those specific places that actually are holding back inclusivity and actually safety of our queerness. Because as Nina was saying, we just want to only live. We're not asking much. We want to live. We want to feel lived. The other day we were talking about how every queer person in Africa has experienced war, an experience of trauma, of war, a lot of suffering, and in addition also this sabotage of themselves, of not being enough and not being called other names, being demoniac. So we really need to also have some energy that can focus on building so that in the future, at least, we are not going to have only discussion. We are also going to have politicians, also religious leaders, part of this conversation, and willing also actually to take actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adela. As you saw, as we were progressing towards the end, I started calling people Doctor and then Mr. And towards the end, I was calling Simon, Mineke, Adela. That's how this group works. Like we forget the titles, and at one point we become families. You may have realized that we came up dressed in red, almost like as if we had passed the word around. Those who were not ran to put it on like in a few seconds they came back. So anyway, so just to say that I love that we have done this work today, and I think we are going to do much more work. We could not be with Dr. Nyek, who is on the poster, because of reasons that do not depend on her will. She really wanted to be with us, and of course we still have many webinars coming up in the future. So she will be on those webinars as one of the presenters. So now, before I say too much and we go way beyond the time we assign to ourselves, would Simon like to say a closing word? And thank you very much for having allowed me to moderate this conversation.
Thank you, Father Ineza. As usual, you are excellent and superb in guiding us through. We thank you for that. We also want to thank everyone who joined us. And then I'm reading here that there were even 24 persons and 20 stayed, or 18 are still with us. That's amazing. We don't know where you are joining us from, but everyone who came to join, we want you have the link, the YouTube link, spread the word, share with your friends, even share with your enemies so that they can see. You never know where conversion can occur. And the thing is this, well, as we say, we want to see an Africa where an African queer child can flourish and live an abundant life and contribute to Mother Africa's dream and vision so that the next generation can be healthy. So the little way, just by being with us, it's excellent. Keep doing that. Join us. Look out for the next flyer. We'll have future events. And you notice the passion by which we engage ourselves, the conversation, and then so that is what we are, and that is the beauty of Africa, of a research group. We really engage each other. So I would want to invite Jody to maybe do a ritual of peace, of life for us. I know I never asked you before, but Jody, if you can do that for us to end our event.
So, in the name of the life that courses through all of us, that comes to us from the very beginnings of our universe, in the name of all that we share in our physical being, our spiritual being, in the name of courage, in the name of solidarity, in the name of willing sacrifice, and in the name of joy in being who we are and recognizing who everyone else is. May we who have gathered together from different parts of the world, some in the evening, some in midday, some in the morning, wherever we are, may we now leave this space strengthened for the journey, enlightened, and having been lightened of any burdens that we brought here. And may the spark that comes from this gathering be something that we can carry in us and pass through us to others. We ask for this in the name of life, and we ask for the gift of abundant life for us all.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And that was excellent. I just read what Peter Knox wrote.